welcome to the video. Now this is exciting because we're talking about the pretty popular 2021 14 and 16 inch MacBook Pros. And right off the bat, I'm going to tell you, these MacBook Pros are really good. It feels like Apple finally listened to the professionals out there and gave them a product that not only they wanted, but a product that they finally deserved, which is crazy given Apple's reputation as a hardware company. So these MacBook Pros are really, really nice, and I have been thoroughly impressed. But let's jump into the details. Let's talk new MacBook Pros. This is going to be fun. Now, I do want to start with the most noticeable and obvious difference, and that's the design and build refresh. Although this kind of goes slightly beyond your typical hardware refresh, Apple decided to switch from that low profile, sleek, really svelte look of the last generation MacBook Pro, and this time around they opted for a boxier, bigger, quite honestly thicker and more industrial look with the new generation MacBook Pro. And last generation had its pros and cons. I actually really like the design. And this generation looks really, really nice as well, even though it looks really different. When you look at these MacBook Pros, they honestly, it kind of looks like a PowerBook. It's just big, it's boxy, it has a really, really large presence about it. And you can see those changes all throughout the design of the computer itself as well. So when you look at those redesigned scissor mechanism keyboards, it looks really nice and industrial. You look at the bottom of the laptop and you have these really tall raised feet that kind of help with thermal management. And I believe Apple also improved the internals when it comes to thermal management too. So I think we're looking at like 50% more improved thermal management on these new Macs, which is great as well. But yeah, man, I'm really getting like PowerBook vibes here, but more of a modern PowerBook, if that makes sense. I mean, even on the bottom case of these new MacBooks, you have the words MacBook Pro engraved into the casing. And that's typically not something we've ever seen from Apple. And on top of that, you wanna know what else is wild? We got our ports back this year around. So you actually have MagSafe making its return, and that MagSafe is capable of fast charging the battery on these computers. You have 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, you have a headphone jack, you have an HDMI 2.0 port, and you have a full-size SD card reader port. And I remember watching the keynote, and I can't remember who was talking about the ports making a return on these computers, but it was literally the most Apple thing I've ever seen in my entire life, where they talked about how the professionals need these ports on their computer, so they brought them back. But I started laughing and thinking to myself, weren't you the one who took the ports away in the first place and then tried to tell us that we don't need them? And then another thing that they tried to tell us that we needed was the Touch Bar. Touch Bar is now gone. RIP, Touch Bar. You will be missed. Probably not by very many people. You're not going to be missed by me either. But Touch Bar has been replaced with a full row of function keys. Thank goodness. So hardware-wise, it's impressive. And the displays on these notebooks are, I mean, phenomenal. We're talking best in class type figures here, okay? So Apple is calling the display on these Liquid Retina XDR. They're mini LED, almost 4K resolution with a variable refresh rate up to 120 Hertz. Think about Apple's Pro Display XDR, slightly different, mind you, but shrunk down to fit in a compact notebook frame. That's essentially the type of display that we're dealing with here. And yes, elephant in the room, more like notch on top of the display. There is a notch. I don't mind it. When I first saw it, when the Mac was introduced, I thought to myself, why on earth would Apple do something like that? But as I've used the computer, it really doesn't bother me. I feel like it's one of those things that you should probably see and try out yourself in person. It's really easy to look at it and just roast it. But as you start using the computer, you know, Apple did a good job of putting just the status bar up top with the space that the notch takes up. And as you're using applications, they do a good job of just kind of working around the notch. If you hover over it with your mouse, the mouse goes right underneath it seamlessly. So it really doesn't get in the way of a lot of things. And if you really do hate it that much, you can always install like a third-party application that will kind of black out the status bar. And since it is mini LED, it will look really nice. It'll just kind of make the computer look like it has some slightly chunkier bezels up top. So overall, my take on the notch is, I don't hate it. I just kind of, you kind of live with it. Now, I will say this. if Apple continues to use notches with their MacBook Pros in the future, I hope they're at least housing Face ID, because you know what's in that notch? 3 components: an ambient light display, an LED sensor, or an LED light, I should say, and a 1080p webcam. Thank you, Apple, for stepping it up from 720 to 1080p, 1. But 2, the Face ID notch on iPhones are significantly smaller and they house much more sophisticated technology. So fingers crossed that when Apple refreshes these MacBooks, they bring it with Face ID, because that's the only reason why I would see them use a notch this big. So Face ID on the next MacBook, I hope, but for now, we have Touch ID built into the keyboard. Now that we've talked hardware, let's talk about internals. Now, I don't want to sit here and give you benchmark numbers or just, spit numbers at you across the screen. I want to give you more of a real world example. And the reason why is because even with these new notebooks, there are quite a few configuration options that you might be considering. I mean, you can have differences in processor, RAM, memory, and even display size. For the sake of our video, both these computers are M1 Max MacBook Pros with 32 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage. Now, I want to talk to you about a use case scenario, but keep in mind, this is a MacBook for professionals, so your use case scenario will probably differ from ours. But here in the studio, we obviously focus on this, video creation. So what we decided to do was upload 8K video to the computer, open up Final Cut Pro and Premiere Pro with both the 8K footage on both software at the same time. We edited both 8K videos at the same time. We rendered both 8K videos and exported both 8K videos relatively quickly while the MacBook was not plugged into power and the fans never spun up once. The MacBook never hiccuped at all or had some sort of performance issue while running both pieces of software at the same time. And in terms of battery life, I think it dropped maybe 3%. I mean, it was very minimal at most. Apple really took a gamble whenever it came to vertical integration with their Macs as they kind of shift away from Intel, and it is very clearly paid off. The performance from what we're seeing on notebooks like this is unlike anything that we currently have available on the market. It is just mind-blowing type stuff. But the real question is, do you need to buy this computer? Now, if you're like a lot of folks out there and you really, really love Apple products, then I feel like I already know you and I know your answer. You're probably already considering buying one of these computers. The 2021 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros are your classic understand your use case scenario before you invest in this product. This is far and away a professional's notebook. It is a workhorse. It's actually more than a workhorse. It's like a whole stable of workhorses, and all those workhorses are on like 5 different types of steroids. So know what you're going to use the computer for, because if you do buy one, you will probably be spending a ton of money depending on how you configure it. So if you're not someone who's really going to use this computer to its full potential, your money is most definitely better spent somewhere else. But if you feel like you can make the most out of M1 Pro or M1 Max, then I don't think either one of the computers will let you down. If you decide to go with M1 Max, understand it is the more powerful chip out of the two. It will just slightly eat into your battery life a little bit more because you're going with 32 core GPU instead of 16. But either way, I hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. As always, do me a favor and subscribe here if you're new. And please stay safe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.